Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuki. Coming up.
I found her appointment to be rushed by all those other named people who wanted to get her in.
Fiji's former anti-corruption boss is determined to clear her name. Also, Bougainville appears to be happy with independence talks' progress and...
It's been really exciting coming back for this particular year because, they're really trying to make this thing bigger and better.
The Heilala festival showcases the best of Tongan culture. The head of Fiji's Damning Commission of Inquiry admits to publicly calling the Anti-Corruption Agency Commissioner universally corrupt while investigating her appointment. Justice David Ashton Lewis made the comments after Barbara Malimali's lawyer said on Thursday that her client's reputation had been destroyed by his public remarks. Margot Staunton spoke to Justice Ashton Lewis and asked for an explanation.
I found her to be universally corrupt. That's what the evidence, both from people who took a different view and spoke against her, and many did. I listened to her over 4 days, and I heard Mrs. Mason put to her that not filling out legal practice certificates correctly over 4 or 5 years was untruthful.
What was the main finding against Mali in terms of her background and the fact that she had been banned from working as a lawyer in Tuvalu?
One of the questions put to her for her practicing certificate in Fiji, have you ever been barred or banned from practice in Fiji or another jurisdiction? The first time she said a sort of yes and didn't address the issue. And then the next 5, she said to that question, no. Now that's simply a lie, and it is simply untrue, and it is simply forgery.
All of the lawyers involved in the inquiry are likely to file an application with the High Court to try and have the report quashed. And what they've said is they're going to do this on the basis that you did not follow the terms of reference or you went outside the terms of reference.
Well, they've got to produce evidence of that. Miss Wanganika and Miss Mali may hold that view. All I can say to them is Mrs. Mason and myself followed the terms of reference absolutely to the final point, because the terms of reference were not only about Barbara Mali's appointment. I found her appointment to be rushed by all those other named people who wanted to get her in. They wanted cases against most of them themselves and other government peoples closed or thrown out. So I found she was rushed. She was appointed illegally, not according to openness and integrity. On that, they can say I was wrong. They can say I was biased. I did my job properly. The other terms of reference are, was there any undue interference by people in her appointment? Well, I found, yes, there was. The Manawa Kamakamitha, the Chief Justice, Turanga, Rapati Green, and Graham Leung. Graham Leung didn't act as dismissively, but Graham Leung simply failed to carry out his job that the Attorney General was required to carry out in the appointment.
He has come out actually in the Fijian media this week and said
I know,
that
I've seen it all.
that he never conspired with anyone with regard to her appointment and that he rejects your findings outright.
Well, of course he would. He's adversely named, and I never said that he conspired. My point was that he didn't do his job properly. He sought advice after first advising the Chief Justice to hold off on her appointment. He was right in that. But then later in that day, after speaking to people in the Constitutional Officers Commission who have no say in this, their opinions of Barbara Mali are irrelevant, yet he acted on their opinions and advised the Chief Justice, who did the right thing. He held off, waiting to hear further from the Attorney General, but the Attorney General went to the wrong place. And both of them failed when they got word that Mali had complaints against her for abuse of office currently running in FICAC. They should have gone further, and one stopped her appointment and said, we need to do further investigation in that. Neither of them did.
From 1946 to 1962, 67 nuclear bombs were detonated in the Marshall Islands, about 2,000 kilometers away from Guam, where the fallout of the tests is still being felt. Downwind eligibility of the United States Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is set to extend to the whole states of Utah, Idaho, and New Mexico, but Guam has been excluded in the extension bill. Congressman James Moylan made an attempt for Guam to be included before the bill passed to the House floor.
Guam has become a forgotten casualty of the nuclear era. Federal agencies have confirmed that our island received measurable radiation exposure as a result of U.S. nuclear testing in the Pacific. And yet, despite this clear evidence, Guam remains excluded from RECA, a program that was designed specifically to address the harm caused by our nation's own policies.
It was supported by New Mexico Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez.
I am pleased, as you can imagine, that New Mexico is included in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. There are many aspects of this bill that many Democrats support. That is righting an injustice, but what is sad is that Guam and other communities were not included.
Caleb Fotheringham asked Robert Celestial, the president of Pacific Association for Radiation Survivors, if he knew why Guam was left out.
I just heard different rumors, nothing concrete. That first it was Utah and Missouri who made a deal to keep Guam out. And then when Senator Crapo, from Idaho, who defended us and tried to get back in, because Idaho and Guam and Colorado were left out last week. So when Senator Crapo put in for Idaho and Guam, I was told that Senator Grassley said just pick one. So he had to pick Idaho, of course, so Guam was kicked out. And so even though we tried our best to try and get Guam in, a lot of excuses were saying that it's going to cost too much, Guam is going to put a burden on the financials. Then I asked, what's the CBO score? The Congressional Budget Office puts out a score, how much for each state, how much for each county, and Guam. And Guam's CBO score was $560 million. Then I find out that Missouri's $5.6 billion, and I just found out just now that Idaho's CBO score is $1.4 billion. So I'm trying to find the other scores for Utah, New Mexico, and the other Kentucky and everyone, and then I'm going to compare it and say that can't be the reason that you kick Guam out, because we're the lowest on the totem pole for the amount of money it's going to cost to get us through in the bill.
How are you feeling about this, and how's everyone else in Guam who's been following this development?
We're always disappointed. We're disappointed for many, many reasons. Is because ever since 2005, when the National Academies of Science wrote a report to Congress, and yes, Guam did receive measurable fall-off on the nuclear testings in the Pacific, and that the residents of Guam should be included in RECA as downwinders. That was in the report from the National Research Council to Congress. So we've been hoping that would, get us in the door, and it has got us in the door, but Congress seems to not understand, that we're no different than any state. We're human beings. We got affected the same way they do. We're suffering the same way. And so, yeah, we're greatly disappointed, heartbroken, and we're hoping and praying that we'll continue on this fight.
Do you think there will be a time where the US will have to eventually pay Guam? Do you think it's eventually going to happen?
Yes, I totally believe, because it's taken the other states 30 years also, just to get recognized. And our fight is basically longer than most of them that are in there, like Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and Alaska. But I believe we need to go in. I mean, the justification is there. Matter of fact, when they asked for the science, we gave them the science, but the other states didn't have no science. They just had publicities and word of mouth. That's all they had. But they didn't have, the same evidence that we had, that we presented before the National Academies of Science.
Bougainville and Papua New Guinea have concluded many months of talks on the autonomous province's quest for independence. Most recently, the parties met for 10 days at the New Zealand Army camp at Burnham, a place dubbed the spiritual home of the Bougainville Peace Agreement, after it featured 28 years ago in the talks that ended the Civil War. But there appeared to be few achievements the parties could point to, and there's been little communication from either government with the public. The Minister for the Implementation of the Independence Referendum, Ezekiel Massat, managed to shed a different light on the matter in this discussion with Don Wiseman.
There have been lots of meetings and lots of talks going back, you could say, going back 28 years. But since this referendum process began, we've had nearly 6 years of talks off and on. And Bougainville hasn't got much to show for it, has it?
In terms of what?
Progress has not been great.
Is Bougainville to blame for it?
I don't know. What's going on? Why is no progress being made?
Progress specifically in terms of what?
In terms of getting close to the tabling of the referendum, the process of getting toward independence by the 1st of September 2027, which is what the government has said it aims to do.
The Bougainville government?
Yes, the Bougainville government said that.
Okay, let me put on record the 1st of September date while everybody is warming to it. That date was recommended by the Bougainville Leaders Consultative Forum, and it's a recommendation. Now, at the moment, we're going through the process of the Bougainville Constituent Assembly, who are debating the independence constitution. That starts today, coincidentally. So today and tomorrow is committed to the Bougainville Constituent Assembly. And once they've concluded their debate on the Constitution, then we'll see what happens. Now, let me make it absolutely clear, Don, that whilst we have embarked on various pathways to independence, I've always made it absolutely clear that our preferred option is to get independence through consensus, and that's through the BPA. We know the history of what has transpired after the conduct of the referendum. There's been a series of consultations. There's been a breach, like I said years ago, that Papua New Guinea lives in a daily breach because there had been an agreement on ratification being a couple of years ago. That hasn't transpired. Now, despite all the hiccups, I think there's a new leash of life with the Melanesian Relationship Agreement. The Melanesian Relationship Agreement, one, allows the two governments to look at what sort of sovereign powers Bougainville can exercise in the interim. It also calls for the immediate consultation between the two houses, the speakers and the clerk, in terms of the sessional order. And more importantly, it has called for the immediate activation of the bipartisan committee. And it's now been agreed that once the report of the bipartisan committee goes into the House, the National Parliament, then the referendum result and the consultative outcomes will also go in. We have a commitment from the chairman of the bipartisan committee, Dr. Marat, in New Zealand, that they would commence work quickly. And I've been advised that as early as this weekend, the bipartisan was supposed to meet in Rabaul in one of the first engagements. To me, there's no delay on our part. It's a process. And therefore, while there's been some delays, we're confident in where we're going.
Under the Melanesian Agreement, some sovereign powers being handed down earlier. What are we talking about?
We haven't worked on the specifics, but my view is that, and the government's view is that we won't be able to assume all the sovereign powers. And therefore, I think priority must be given to some economic sovereign powers where we can make some decisive economic decisions. And I think that's a start. But despite the elections going on, I am hopeful that the technical teams can continue to meet to craft out some clear agenda in terms of which sovereign powers we can assume in the interim.
Okay, so you're quite confident that Port Moresby is fully supportive of the process, or do you think they're delaying the process?
Put it this way, if the national government procrastinates, and they have a historical record of procrastinating, whether it's justified or not, we have other options that are open to us. We had this discussion before that the other option to get independence is through the working of the independent constitution. And I have, in the original motion setting up the Constituent Assembly, I was very clear in reaching out to the national government by making the motion for the adoption of the Constitution and any other resolution to be subject to the consultative outcome and the moderation talk. Now, having reconsidered that the possibility is there of a national government strategy to procrastinate and to delay, I have since amended that motion. The House has amended that motion yesterday, stating clearly that the resolutions by the Constituent Assembly will no longer be in principle. If the Constituent Assembly goes ahead and adopts the Constitution, then it is within its legal right to set the date for independence.
So the Constituent Assembly is the premier political body?
No, it's not the premier political body. It's the body that specifically deals with the amendment, rejection, or adoption of the Constitution. And once it's done that, its activities come to an end.
So we talked about the 1st of September 2027, and that's a maybe then. But when do you think Bougainville might be independent? How far away is it, this independence?
We have the recommended date. Everybody's warming to that date. The question of independence readiness, that's being addressed throughout the constituencies in Bougainville. The autonomous Bougainville government is working through these issues in terms of all the other economic big projects, so that we're in a position where we can sustain the economy and move forward.
In terms of the economy, you've still got a lot of work to do to have any degree of economic viability, don't you?
That's a justifiable argument, and I have made it absolutely clear that the work on the economy of Bougainville must now also take some precedence. My argument is that to make the economy subject to political independence is something that I wouldn't agree to. We must obtain political independence in order to have some sovereign powers, in order to make strategic economic decisions. Now, given the Melanesian Agreement, where Bougainville can assume some sovereign powers, I think that's a great start in the right direction, and therefore I look forward to continued engagement by the technical officials, and we can address some of these economic issues now. Having said that, it's not like we're sitting around doing nothing in Bougainville. You know, there are very major economic initiatives that have been taken on by the government. Another issue is, as you know, there's been the transfer of the BCL shares. That's an issue on its own. I'm not going to dive into that issue, and I think even on the economic issues, I've very much left it to the economic ministers to come in. But overall, I think to demand that Bougainville should meet some economic threshold or be economic independent before political independence, I think is a foolish argument. Australia never demanded that Papua New Guinea be economically independent. When Papua New Guinea got its independence, it had nothing except the Panguna mine to deal with. So I don't know why everybody's imposing on that economy. Whilst it's a genuine call, I think it's an internal matter for Bougainville to work on its economy. We're not shying away from that responsibility.
Tonga is pulling out all the stops this week for its annual Heilala festival, which is reportedly to be bigger than ever this year. The festival also honours the official birthday of King Tupou VI. Held mainly in the kingdom's capital, Nuku'alofa, the festival features cultural performances, float parades and the Miss Heilala pageant. I caught up with ABC Pacific presenter and reporter Alice Lolo to give us some of the highlights from the kingdom. Malulele, Alice, what's the mood been like in Tonga during the week of the Heilala festival?
You know, there's never a better time to be in Tonga than during the Heilala festival. This is the most energetic I've seen the kingdom, even when I was living here, to be honest. It's been so fun, and you know, I think it's a good reminder for Tongans living overseas. Like, if there's ever a time you want to come back home to the kingdom, Heilala Week is it.
And just for historical context, Alice, how long has this festival been running for now?
So Heilala Week's been running for quite a while. It was actually created by the late King George V, who was Crown Prince at the time, and he created Heilala Week in celebration of his father's birthday. And so, 46 years of this has been, it's come to become a staple in the kingdom. So, the excitement around it is very palpable, but it's been really exciting coming back for this particular year because, they're really trying to make this thing bigger and better. So this year, they've got a give back concert that's happening on Saturday. A lot of the biggest names in Pacific music have come to play for free for people in the kingdom, which is really exciting. And there's also been a rugby league tournament as well. So, yeah, I mean, I can only imagine if it's already big this year, imagine what it's going to be in the years to come.
Absolutely. And you've just mentioned earlier that the Heilala Week coincides with the King's birthday. How are people celebrating his birthday today?
Yeah, it was really beautiful. Today there was a float parade. But it's really funny. I was actually staying at a place behind the palace, and I was rudely awoken by the sound of a brass band. So, the official the country's official brass band, yeah. They were, His Majesty's armed forces, they were warming up behind the palace, and then this morning they did a march around the palace together with some of the kingdom scouts as well, and then they all joined the float parade where all the contestants for the Miss Heilala and some other companies, drove floats down the main roads, to interact with the people. And His Majesty King Paul VI and Queen Anaspau were actually in vehicles driving past the float to have a look at it all, and it was really cool to see everyone getting excited to see the King and Queen, driving around. It was fun.
While we're still on the topic of the royal family, I also understand that the King and Queen of Tonga will be visiting Fiji to attend the installation ceremony of the Tui Lau chiefly title. How significant is that for Tonga? Do locals see that as a big deal?
Oh, absolutely. Quite a number of nobles have actually left already to Fiji to attend, and by Navy as well. And it's significant for Tonga because we've had a long history with the Fijians, with the Samoans as well. And so, things like this only solidify that history, that relationship as well. So it's very exciting for the people.
And just coming back to the Heilala Festival, we've got the Miss Heilala crowning happening later on tonight. Have you been able to speak with some of the contestants or the reigning or outgoing Miss Heilala, Rachel Gutenbeil herself? How are they feeling?
Yeah, we have spoken to Rachel Gutenbeil. For her, this was a massive thing to take on this role. I think, for her, it sort of opened her eyes to the community, to the people, and interacting with them. And I think she was actually really inspired by the young girls who often, would interact with her at events and things. But we've actually been following the journey of Miss Lady Maria Tonga Australia, who's also a contestant at Miss Samoa New South Wales. So she's Samoan Tonga. Her name's Anna Lee, and this was actually her first time coming to the kingdom to represent her mother's heritage. And oh my gosh, she's got such an inspirational backstory. So her and her mother actually, were living in a shelter for quite a while. They escaped, a domestic violence situation. And, they've just managed to pull through, go from strength to strength. She's been heavily inspired by her younger siblings. She wanted to do this for them to show them, anything's possible. And she also wanted to make sure that they, learn to be proud of their Samoan and Tongan roots. So that her journey has been incredible, just to see her be in Tonga for the first time.
She sounds like an amazing young woman. And this festival must be like a nice little break for the Tongan politicians because they've got the elections coming up, don't they?
They do, but what's really funny is that, you'd think they'd take a break from, the political sphere, but we've actually seen a little bit of controversy during the Heilala Festival itself. So during the pre-pageant interviews that happened on Tuesday, one of the judges, his name's Edgar Cocker, he's the CEO of Tonga Airport Limited, was asking very pointed, kind of undercover political questions to the contestants. And I think it was very clear to see for, the people who were watching the event that, a lot of the commentary online, you could see people like, okay, so what kind of question, should you be asking Heilala contestants? So that was interesting to observe.
Thank you so much, Alice, for your time. Before I let you go, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny watching this pageant. I'm actually covering this pageant as part of a story that I'm doing for the show that I work on. But it's completely changed my outlook on pageants in general. I think for the most part, if you're not watching these things and you're not in the know, you sort of tend to think, pageants, like beauty queens and whatnot. But I think the Pacific has really made pageants their own thing. They've made it a real cultural endeavor. And I think what's been really inspiring to see is a lot of the girls who are competing are from overseas, But this is like a real chance for cultural connection for them.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā sui fua.